The last thing Lena Hart remembers is the metal taste of fear as the car door slams, a gloved hand covering her mouth, and the sound of her baby's heartbeat echoing in her ears from that morning's ultrasound. By the time Seattle's sky bruises into evening, she's gone, her phone abandoned near a loading dock, her purse neatly zipped in the passenger seat of a sedan that isn't hers. On the 8th floor of a glass office tower, Adrian Coleridge, her estranged husband and the city's most photographed fintech founder, signs a document that makes her lawyer disappear, too. It feels like a game with no rules, and someone else is writing the moves. Lena had always said the small cuts hurt longest, splinters of disappointment, late meetings, a missed birthday call to her sister. Big injuries demanded action. Little ones lingered. She learned that in the pediatric oncology wing where she used to work, the place where bravery stickers outnumbered flowers, she left the hospital last year, pregnant, exhausted, already limping emotionally through a marriage that kept changing shape every time Adrian brought home a new victory. 5 minutes, he'd call from the Marble Island, answering 3 phones. "I'm here. I'm listening." He seldom was, at least not to the tremor beneath her words. She had not married a monster. Adrian could be tender, could make soup when she was sick, could leave light on the stairs. He was also used to power, how it bent time and rearranged obstacles. He once pulled a string to get their dog allowed on a no-pets beach. Rules were frameworks, not fences. When Adrian hired Marissa Vale as Coleridge Capital's chief strategy officer, the pivot was chalked up to scale. The company needed someone ruthless. Investors purred at the pick. Lena noticed the new perfume on his jackets before she noticed gaps in his gaze. It wasn't one betraying text, but an accumulation. 2 polished replies, an email thread blurring into midnight, a missed prenatal appointment with a calendar excuse. Quarterly. She found the receipt for 2 stemless wine glasses etched with A&M after a bored dinner. "Team gifts," he insisted, and she wanted it to be true so much it nearly was. The night Lena told him about the baby, he looked at her like he'd stepped into sunlight too fast. Awe, panic, tenderness. Then the calls kept coming. The private jet photos kept landing in the tabloids. Marissa's quotes about leaning into disruption ran alongside Adrian's in glossy magazines. Lena's name disappeared from the narrative like white ink on a white page. Mediation was her idea. "I don't want a war. I want boundaries," she told Nathan Rios, the family lawyer her friend Tessa recommended. Nathan specialized in keeping divorces out of court. He had a face that inspired confessions, soft at the edges, eyes like a church foyer. "We can aim for a post-nup revision," Nathan said, careful. "Clarify custody, create financial guardrails. It can be decent, not easy, but decent." The first mediation session, Adrian arrived in a suit that fit like certainty. He looked tired, like a man who'd traded sleep for headlines. But when he saw the printout of the ultrasound in Lena's lap, a softness broke through the CEO sheen. He asked for water. He asked if she was sleeping okay. He didn't ask about Marissa. On a legal pad, Nathan sketched the outline: joint legal custody, Lena's physical custody for the first year, Adrian's overnights after 6 months, child support pegged to a percentage rather than a fixed sum, a clause about nannies and work travel. It was reasonable. It was the carcass of a marriage with the bones arranged carefully. Then, week 2, something shifted. Nathan started arriving late, sweat shining at his temple, phone face down but vibrating like a small trapped animal. "Sorry. Court ran long," he'd say to nobody in particular. He'd suggest compromises with a flinch, like someone had yelled in the hallway. "Is someone pressuring you?" Lena asked in the lobby, after a session that stalled on nothing more than adjectives. "No," he lied with grace. Process pressure. It happens. That night, Tessa called while Lena stirred soup and tried not to cry into the pot. "I saw a thing," Tessa said, voice hushed. "Marissa gave a quote about you not handling the pace. That felt pointed." Tessa had never liked Adrian's world, the way people smiled with their teeth and never their eyes. Lena didn't answer. The baby fluttered, a tiny fish. In bed, she searched. Conflict of interest family law. Then closed the tab because she couldn't yet admit what she feared. In a world where power resized everything, the person supposed to defend her might be for sale. The following morning, Lena met Adrian at a midtown cafe because public places once felt safer. He arrived without a jacket, rain purled on his sleeves. "Let's end the spectacle," he said, sliding a proposal across the table. It was generous, on paper. A townhouse buyout, a trust fund that sounded like an apology, nanny coverage, a driver until the baby turned 2. "You don't need the fight, do you?" she asked. When he didn't answer, she knew. She handed the papers back. "I want honesty, not hush." He flinched. "Nothing would ever happen at the office," he said too quickly, which was the wrong denial, in the wrong tense. She heard herself whisper, "Who taught you to lie like that?" And he looked, briefly, like a boy caught under a table with a broken vase. The next day, Nathan withdrew from her case without a reason that made sense. Paper cut, Lena thought as the notice arrived. Small cut. Still bleeds. On a grey Thursday, Lena drove to a second ultrasound alone. She kept a paper bag on the passenger seat. Morning sickness, renamed by someone who'd never had it. Adrian texted a heart and a calendar screenshot of a board vote he couldn't move. She told herself it was okay. Babies came how they came. She would show the sonogram to him later and watch his face thaw. The technician was kind. 10 fingers, 10 toes. Probably, she teased. Strong heartbeat. Lena recorded the sound on her phone, like a train over far tracks, a life insisting itself. Leaving the clinic, the day felt both possible and precarious. She walked through the parking garage, keys in hand like a talisman, and thought of her mother's advice. Hold your chin high around people who mistake kindness for weakness. She never saw the first figure step from behind the pillar. A cloth, a hand. The world went static. Hours later, a security guard found Lena's phone near a loading zone behind a bakery 3 blocks from the clinic. By then, a black SUV had already merged into freeway anonymity, tinted windows absorbing the city. Adrian didn't learn she was missing until Tessa called, iron in her voice, asking if Lena was with him. "She texted me the heartbeat," Tessa said. Then nothing. He checked the Find My Ping in the shared family app, a habit he'd told himself was about safety, not control. The phone's dot pulsed in a neighborhood Lena never traveled. He told his head of security to meet him at the garage. He told himself this was a misunderstanding that a phone call would solve. At the garage, a tired cop took notes on a pad that looked like it had been wet and dried and used too many times. "Adults can disappear on their own," the officer said, with the affect of someone on hour 9 of a 12-hour shift. "We'll put it through." "She's 6 months pregnant," Adrian said. And the word pregnant seemed to wake the man up just a little. Back at Coleridge Capital, Marissa leaned in the doorway of Adrian's office, a hurricane in a silk blouse. "What happened?" "She's missing," Adrian said, and Marissa's face performed concern without quite embodying it. She moved fast, calling their PR crisis manager, instructing the assistant to hold calls. "You should stay off social for 48 hours, she said, voice smooth. "We shape a statement. We emphasize your cooperation. We underline your devotion." He stared. "I'm not crafting a narrative," he said. "I'm finding my wife." His wife. The word startled them both. The company's chief of security, a former detective named Omar, returned with the footage. Grainy video of a woman with Lena's hair getting into a sedan that wasn't hers. She walked, Omar said, not dragged. Staged, Adrian said, throat dry. She'd never get into a stranger's car. Marissa's hand on his arm felt like a clamp. Could be a decoy, she murmured. Could be she needed space. He pulled away. Don't do that. Don't reposition this. That night, the notice came from Nathan's office. Withdrawal effective immediately. No reason, no explanation. Just absence. The timing was obscene. Adrian called him. You can't do this, he said. Conflict of interest arose, Nathan said. His voice sounded smaller without the office to prop it up. I'm sorry. What conflict? Click, no answer. Marissa, late at his apartment, kicked off her heels and looked at Adrian with a softness borrowed from their better days. Let me make this easier, she said, and reached for him like he was a problem she could solve with touch. He recoiled. I can't. For the first time since he'd built his empire, Adrian felt truly poor, in the way that mattered, in the way where control tasted like ash. Tessa slept on Lena's couch that night, the dog at her feet like a small alarm. She called every hospital within 50 miles. She called Lena's prenatal yoga friend, the barista who knew Lena's order, the volunteer coordinator at the non-profit. Nothing. Absence had a sound now, the dial tone starting over. At 3 a.m., Tessa sent Adrian a text. We are not allies, but she needs both of us. Don't try to manage this. Just help. He sat in the dark, staring at the message like it was a map. Seattle's missing persons unit was short-staffed, like everything civic that didn't trend. Adrian's money bought speed, which meant Omar pulled favors, but the city still moved at a city's pace. Once a case hits 48 hours, Omar said, we'll have more leverage. 48 hours felt like an insult. Has she run before? A detective asked Adrian across a table that smelled like coffee and paperwork. His palms sweated. Once, 2 years ago, after a fight, Lena had driven to the coast and watched the waves until sunrise. She'd come home with sea salt hair, tired and easy. No, he said honestly, because he really believed it. Any threats? Stalkers? Disgruntled anyone? He thought of angry investors' emails, the kinds of messages men send when a woman turns them down. You aren't that special. The monstrous casualness of entitlement. He thought of the new security cameras he'd meant to install at the townhouse and hadn't. Shame was a new language. He was becoming fluent by the minute. Tessa brought in her own stack of notes, the edges highlighted like a battle plan. Her ex-colleague from the hospital said a man lingered by the parking lot last week, she said. Tall. Cap pulled low. No, they didn't get plates. She turned to Adrian, jaw set. Nathan withdrawing is not a coincidence. Do you think he was bought? Adrian asked quietly. I think people do messy calculus, Tessa said, and I think someone's flipping fractions behind the scenes. Back at headquarters, Marissa staged compassion for the staff. She told HR to offer counseling. She told legal to pre-draft statements. In her office, she closed the door and dialed a number under consultant. The lawyer stepped off, she said. Keep a leash on public sentiment. No villains, no victims. Easy, the voice purred. Until the FBI shows. Marissa stilled. Why would the FBI? Cross jurisdictions, the voice said. Or if someone turns this into a federal offense. Marissa swallowed, then fixed her face, then rehearsed a smile in the window reflection, the city's lights studding her like a costume. She had spent her life building a persona out of walking away first, before anyone could abandon her. Power was safety. Power meant no one could drop you. You dropped them. But this wasn't a game on a whiteboard anymore. Lena's disappearance did not behave. It could not be optimized. When Special Agent Mara Quinn called Adrian, Her voice was calm as a winter morning. "Mr. Coleridge, this is Mara Quinn with the Seattle field office. I'm following up on a referral from missing persons, based on a pattern we're seeing with interstate transport and electronic interference." She didn't say, "Kidnapping, not yet." "May I come by?" He said yes before he remembered to ask Marissa to leave the building. Agent Quinn sat in his glass office and watched him like a scientist studying weather. "Your wife's lawyer withdrew the day she went missing," she said, flipping through a file. "His trust account received a retainer from a Shell LLC registered last week." Adrian's throat closed. "Whose?" "We're working on that," she said. "Have you had any issues with harassment, hacking, or unusual surveillance? Anything that crosses state lines is helpful to us." He looked at Omar, who shifted. Their CTO had flagged a rash of phishing attempts targeting Lena's non-profit email after Adrian's company announced a healthcare partnership. "She got weird emails," Adrian said, shame climbing. "I thought IT handled it." Quinn's pen paused. "We'll want those logs." "What are you thinking?" Tessa asked. She'd insisted on attending. She didn't trust the story without her own eyes on it. Quinn smiled like a condolence card. "I think the person who wants Lena gone understands optics. They staged a voluntary departure so the police would take their time. They timed it with her lawyer's withdrawal to collapse her support structure. They understand how frightened we are of women who are angry, and how quickly we decide they've made a scene." Tessa nodded, eyes wet. "Marissa," she said. Adrian's first instinct was to object. Too easy, too on the nose. But the truth is that his life had recently been an on-the-nose parable. He said nothing. Quinn stood. "We'll need your full cooperation, including internal communications, security camera access, and the names of anyone who stands to gain if Lena is silenced." "Silenced?" Adrian echoed. "Sometimes," Quinn said gently. "Silence looks like absence. Sometimes it looks like a non-disclosure agreement." She handed him her card. "If you're being played, Mr. Coleridge, you're not the first man to confuse ruthlessness for devotion." When she left, the office felt like a stage after the audience went home. Adrian stared at the city. He had built a fortress with transparent walls. Now everyone could see in. He dialed Marissa. "We need to talk." "About the search?" she asked. "About everything," he said. And for the first time since the baby's heartbeat, his voice sounded like a decision. Lena woke to the smell of lemon cleaner and the sound of gulls. The room was blandly furnished, the kind of rental decor that comes in sets. A single window looked out on pale water. Puget Sound. A lake? She couldn't tell. The door was locked from the outside. She tried to sit, and the room spun like a cheap ride. "Finally," a voice said through the door, muffled. "You scared me, Sleeping Beauty." A woman entered, late 30s, hair in a blunt cut like a declaration, sweatshirt that said Isla. Her eyes flicked to Lena's stomach with clinical distance. "Water," the woman said, setting a bottle down. "And you'll eat something. Doctor's orders." "What doctor?" Lena asked, voice sandpapery. "Telehealth," the woman said, smiling without softness. "You know how modern care works." Lena's nurse brain read the woman's posture. Not a sadist, a manager. Someone executing instructions. "Where am I?" she asked. "A lake house," the woman said cheerfully. "Which lake?" Now that would be telling. "Who hired you?" Lena asked. "See, you're clever," the woman said, almost admiring. "Clever gets people hurt. Let's not do clever." Lena curled around the life inside her. She wanted a nurse's chart, a plan, an IV of certainty. Instead, she had will. She drank water. She memorized. 2 locks outside, 1 camera in the upper corner, a faint smell of bleach, the wind carrying salt sometimes, and sometimes not. She slept. She woke to oatmeal. She measured time by the light. She named the baby in her head, then lied to herself and pretended she hadn't. On day 2, if it was day 2, the woman played a podcast too loud in the kitchen, and Lena learned that noise could be a message. If you blast normalcy, it drowns out abnormal. If you keep the washer running, you wash evidence without admitting there is any. On day 3, the woman's phone rang, and Lena heard another voice through the door, filtered, pitched lower, as if run through a cheap disguise app. "Any trouble?" the voice asked. "She's compliant," the woman said. "Those prenatal vitamins you sent are the fancy kind. You caring now?" "Optics matter," the voice said, and Lena recognized the phrase. It was a PR rubric. It was also a threat. Later, Lena pressed her ear to the window and listened to the gulls again. The air carried damp. The water sounded close. She looked at the vent and saw a screw that wasn't flush. Small, she thought. Paper cut, small. That's how you get out. At night, she unscrewed the first screw with her fingernails. It felt like prayer. "Tell me you didn't pay off her lawyer," Adrian said. He and Marissa stood in a private conference room where decisions from the last 5 years had rearranged other people's lives. Marissa crossed her arms. "That's insulting." "It's a question," he said. "It's a fantasy," she snapped. "Why would I do something so reckless?" "Because you believe outcomes justify means?" He didn't say. "Because control keeps you from remembering who you were when your father left." He knew pieces of her history, the way you know landmarks on a drive you stopped taking. Quinn's calm voice hovered in his head. Names of anyone who stands to gain if Lena is silenced. Who benefited if the narrative flipped Lena into a liability? If her moral clarity complicated a merger? If her presence kept Adrian's life slow? Marissa softened, pivoting. "We are exhausted," she said, stepping closer. "We've been living in crisis mode for months. Lena wants to punish you, maybe for good reason, and you are letting her." "I am letting." The phrasing landed like a slap. "You could settle," Marissa said. "You could end this. You could make a quiet agreement that spares everyone. You could—" "Buy silence," he finished. "Like a product." She held his gaze. The light in the room flickered, or perhaps it was his certainty. His mother called just then, a voice from another country, upstate New York, still carrying the cadence of the church where she played piano. "I heard the news," Ruth said. "I'm coming." "You don't have to," he said, and then remembered the last time she'd said, "I'm coming," when his father left with the waitress and a box of ties. She came and sat at the end of his bed and told him belief without boundaries was worshipping a wolf. "Marissa," Ruth said quietly when she arrived. "Let him breathe." "Of course," Marissa smiled and left them alone. Ruth made tea in a kitchen built to be photographed. "You are not a villain," she said, handing him a mug. "But you made a habit of pretending consequences were optional. I didn't—" He stopped. He had. Not intentionally, but by inertia, which is its own choice. "I thought I could keep things separate," he said, meaning business and love, meaning hunger and tenderness, meaning him and the man in the tabloids. "Separation is a useful lie," she said. "It keeps the plates spinning until the china breaks." Agent Quinn texted, "We found the Shell LLC, registered through Three Ponds Holdings. Your COO engaged them last quarter for strategic reputation management. We're serving warrants. If you want redemption, Mr. Coleridge, be ready to testify." Adrian closed his eyes. He had built something beautiful and brutal. He had invited a wolf to run it. Perhaps he had been the wolf and called it weather. He called Quinn. "What do you need?" "Everything," she said. "Emails, contracts, who pitched what, who signed checks, and you to understand this might cost you your company." He looked through the glass at Coleridge Capital, floors of smart, earnest kids who believed in financial access and apps that rounded up spare change into college funds. He had believed in that. He still did. But belief with blinders is complicity by design. "I'll bring the box," he said. The second screw was stubborn. Lena's nails tore. The metallic taste in her mouth returned with every twist. She wrapped floss around the screw head to gain purchase. She thought of the oncology wing again, how the kids called their IV poles robots, how they pretended to race down halls because play was the only way to make the beeps less frightening. The woman, caretaker, guard, whatever role she'd named for herself, brought sandwiches at noon like a ritual. "You're quiet," she observed. "Saving energy," Lena said, "for labor." She watched the woman's eyes flit to her stomach, a calculation happening. People become mathematicians when a baby enters the room, measuring time, measuring risk, measuring what they can live with. "Where is your conscience?" Lena asked. "Safe," the woman said, and left. At dusk, the vent's cover loosened. Behind it, a narrow shaft led to a crawl space, then, perhaps, to other rooms. Too tight for escape now, but wide enough for a message. She took the ultrasound photo from her sock. She'd hidden it there before the clinic, and slid it into the shaft with a note torn from the oatmeal box. "My name is Lena Hart. I am pregnant. I was taken from downtown Seattle. Please call 911. She pushed the paper toward whatever mercy the house contained. On the fourth night, a sound woke her, a furtive scrape, then a whisper through the vent. "Are you okay?" The voice was young, uncertain. "I'm here," Lena whispered back. "Who are you?" "Delivery guy," the voice said. And Lena pictured a kid who signed for provisions and pretended not to see heaviness in the way the woman leaned the door. "You dropped something," he said. "I found it by the utility panel." Tears licked the sides of Lena's nose. "Thank you," she whispered. "Please, call the FBI. Say my name." "I'm supposed to keep my head down," he said, apology thick in his whisper. "You'll be protecting a baby," Lena said, and the silence held a new weight. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay." In the city, Agent Quinn mapped connections on a board until the lines made a net. Three Ponds Holdings had set up a constellation of smaller LLCs that did everything from anonymous tip seeding to payment routing. One of those LLCs, Morning Harbors, had moved a sizable retainer to a private contractor, a woman named Isla Sorrento, former home health aide, current domestic logistics consultant. Quinn did not believe in euphemisms unless they were necessary to get a warrant signed. Adrian's box of documents included an invoice from Three Ponds for legacy risk mitigation, personal life. The signature authorizing the work was Marissa's, but a digital trail showed the task was pitched in Adrian's weekly executive brief as cleaning up noise. He had initialed the summary. His initials looked like guilt. "Do you understand what will happen when we unseal this?" Quinn asked. He nodded. "Then do it." Marissa met with the board hours before the warrants hit, wearing a dress that said competence and a smile that suggested inevitability. "We should move to appoint an interim CEO," she said, brisk. "Adrian is compromised. The optics—" The doors flung, and two federal agents entered like winter. "Marissa Vale?" Agent Quinn asked, even though everyone knew. "We have a warrant for your communications and devices in connection with an ongoing investigation into conspiracy, fraud, witness tampering, and obstruction." Marissa laughed, a bright, brittle sound that broke on the edges. "This is performative," she said, cutting eyes at the chair. "You're letting a family drama bleed into." Quinn didn't blink. "We prefer to call it federal crime." Adrian watched, stomach hollow. "Power looks noble until you see its teeth." He felt a sudden, irrational need to apologize to the interns who'd ever watched him walk into a room and felt small. Marissa's lawyers materialized like conjured. "We will be fighting this," one said, attempting to snatch the narrative mid-air. "This is harassment." "Sure," Quinn said mildly. "Harassment is when the government retrieves emails you paid to send." She turned to Adrian. "Your cooperation is noted." Marissa's mask flickered. "You can't possibly believe I'd harm a pregnant woman," she said, voice dropping into something like honest. "I'm not a villain, Adrian. I'm a strategist." "You weaponized strategy," he said softly, "and I let you call that leadership." She inhaled, eyes wet. Anger, not sorrow. "She was going to ruin everything," she said, the quiet part loud. "Your precious reforms, the merger, the foundation, the picture." She gestured to the air, as if the image of his life hovered there. "She wanted you small." "She wanted me slow," he said, "because a baby needs slow." On the lake, a blue light flickered across the water. The delivery kid had called. Patrol cars staged soft. Agent Deshawn Briggs led the approach, Quinn's partner, tall and steady, with patience like a tool. Sorrento answered the door half open, face doing math. "You got a warrant?" "We have a question," Briggs said. "Have you seen this woman?" He held up a photo of Lena, smiling at a farmer's market, the world still naive. Sorrento's eyes betrayed the truth before her mouth could choreograph a lie. Within minutes, Lena came into the hall, belly first, bones humming, with fear, with relief, with the sound of the baby a wave against her. She leaned on the wall and looked at the men and women in jackets with letters, miracles stitched in thread. She did not cry. She said her name in a clear voice, like a lighthouse. "I am Lena Hart." At the field office, Quinn wrapped her in a blanket that belonged to nobody and everybody. "You were brave," she said. "I was furious," Lena said. "Brave can come later." Sorrento's story fell out in chips, a contract through morning harbors, a promise this would be temporary and painless. Like a retreat, she'd been told. When the word Mistress slid into the conversation, a recording played. Marissa's disguised voice, instructing optics, coordinating payments, demanding silence disguised as care. Nathan Rios, the withdrawing lawyer, walked in wild-eyed without a tie. He had turned himself in the night before, arriving at the FBI with a thumb drive and shame. Three Ponds had paid a retainer to his trust through a third party, then threatened to leak photos of an ancient, irrelevant DUI if he didn't withdraw. "I was a coward," he said to Lena through glass. "I am sorry." She held the apology like something sharp and decided she would not bleed more for his lesson. "Be useful," she said. "Testify." Adrian stood in the bland conference room where survivors and messmakers had been taking turns for days. He looked smaller somehow, tired, less lacquered, edges showing. He took a breath and went in to see Lena. She was at the window, blanket around her shoulders like a cape, the city trying on evening below. Tessa guarded the door with arms crossed and eyes kind. 5 minutes, Tessa said. "No speeches." "Hi," Adrian said, and the word had to work so hard it almost failed. "Hi," Lena said. She did not turn. He stood near but not close. The air between them held a decade of choices. He began, but apology without change is performance. He looked at his shoes, Italian leather, suddenly absurd. "I kept outsourcing the hard parts," he said. "I let a woman who loves knives call that love for me. That's on me," she blinked. "I'm not the audience for your absolution." "Understood," he said. "I'm here to say I'll testify. I'll step down. I'll stop being the center of the universe I built." This made her turn. "You'll step down?" "Yes," he said. "Someone steadier can run the company while I grow a spine." "You always had a spine," she said. "You just loaned it out." He flinched, then nodded. "I did." They stood quietly, the way people do at hospital beds, in airports, in churches, waiting for the world to cue them. Finally, Lena spoke. "The baby's strong," she said. "He kicked during the raid, stubborn, like his people." He almost smiled, then didn't. Can I go to an appointment? As a driver, a coat holder, whatever you allow." She considered, then found a compromise that did not betray her. "You can sit in the back. You can carry the bag. You can listen." "Done," he said, and meant it. In court, a month later, the judge's bench was carved like history. Marissa sat with her lawyers, jaw set, wearing a suit the color of strategy. The U.S. attorney laid out the case in clean, terrible language: conspiracy to kidnap, witness tampering, obstruction, wire fraud. The recording of Marissa's disguised instructions bled through the speakers like poison in water. Adrian testified, eyes steady. He read the emails he should have questioned, the invoices he should have refused, the signature he should have paused over. He did not cast himself as a victim. He named the ways convenience and ambition had joined hands. He named the times Lena had asked for slow, and he chose fast. Nathan testified, voice shaking, about cowardice and calculation. "I thought I could control it," he said. "Turns out control is a drug with bad returns." Sorrento testified last, without flourish. "I told myself I was keeping her safe," she said. "Because I fed her, because I am not a monster. But I took away her name. That's a kind of killing." Marissa stared ahead, a statue chiseling itself. When the jury found her guilty on multiple counts, the air in the courtroom thinned. Tessa exhaled a sound that felt like a prayer. Lena squeezed her sister's hand, once, and only once. Private in a room full of strangers. Outside, microphones bloomed like flowers turned toward weather. The U.S. attorney spoke about deterrence and the sanctity of family. Agent Quinn thanked the community for tips. Adrian declined comment. Lena stepped to the marble, her belly like an exclamation mark, and said simply, "I am going home." The nursery had been paint chips in a bowl before everything. Now it was a room with a chair. Tessa insisted on building the crib herself, cussing at Allen wrenches while the dog supervised. Ruth played hymns on her phone and hummed while she stitched a quilt from fabric no one had thought to save. Community, Lena realized, is not a thing you join. It's a thing that shows up with soup and toolboxes. Adrian arrived with groceries and humility. He'd resigned from Coleridge Capital with a letter that thanked his team and admitted the cost of ambition. The board appointed Omar interim CEO. People cheered. Marissa's sentence would be years. She'd file an appeal. That would be noise later. The baby kicked now. Co-parenting plans were drafted by a lawyer from a legal aid clinic where Nathan volunteered nightly now, filing briefs with a penitent efficiency. The plan gave Lena primary custody and Adrian generous access with guardrails that looked less like punishment and more like clarity. No nannies alone with the baby the first year. No travel without 2 weeks' notice. No strategic consultants anywhere near the family ever again. They both initialed each page. He read each clause aloud. They built a fence and called it love. The day labor started, rain braided the windows. Lena's breath came like clean waves. "Tessa," she gasped, and Tessa was there with a hand and a joke. "Let's make this human," Tessa said. "No pressure. We don't need a prodigy. 10 toes is enough." At the hospital, a nurse clipped her badge to her scrub pocket and said, "I used to work with you." Her eyes crinkled. "You taught me how to talk to parents who think they're failing. You said, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present." Lena laughed, then yelled, then did the work that billions have done and called it impossible. In the pushing and the panting, Adrian stood where she had permitted. Behind the line, hands clasped. Not the hero, not the headline. Just a man learning to witness. At one point, fear flickered in his eyes. "I can't do anything," he whispered. "You can," the nurse said. "You can stay." He stayed. When the baby cried, the sound was the ultrasound made real. They named him Theo because it means gift, and because Lena liked the way the word opened like a door. Adrian cut the cord with shaking hands, weeks stitched into a new pattern. Dawn bottles, dusk baths, the dog confused but loyal. Ruth singing softly in the kitchen. Tessa printing photos and threatening to frame the worst ones. Adrian arrived 3 mornings a week at 7, making coffee like a sacrament. He learned to fold onesies, to sway through colic, to leave when asked. He learned to be steady and small and there. One evening, Lena sat in the nursery chair, Theo asleep on her chest, the room smelling like milk and cedar. Adrian sat on the floor, back against the dresser, tie loosened, socks unmatched. "I miss us," he said quietly, then corrected. "I miss what I thought we were." "We could be something else," she said, not unkind. "It doesn't have to be romantic to be beautiful." He nodded. He did not negotiate. He did not pitch. He rested his head on the edge of the rug and breathed in rhythm with his son. Months later, on a walk under a sky the color of forgiveness, Quinn passed them on the sidewalk. She lifted a hand, a small wave. "You look well," she said. "We are learning," Lena said. Quinn smiled. "That's the best kind of ending," she said. "One that keeps going." At home, Lena poured tea and stood by the window. She watched a neighbor pull weeds, a toddler chuck a shoe, a woman teach herself to parallel park. Life returned to its quiet bravery. She thought of power as something that can bless or bruise, and decided hers would do the first. She signed up for a shift at the clinic. She wrote a letter to other women with invisible wounds. "You are not drama. You are a person. People deserve safety." That night, she put Theo down and stood in the doorway before turning off the light. Adrian paused in the hall, a question in his eyes. She nodded toward the kitchen. "There's soup," she said, "and bread. Stay for dinner if you want. Then go." He smiled, grateful for the simplicity. "I can do that," he said. They ate quietly. After, he washed dishes. She dried. The clock ticked like a metronome. They talked about the grocery list, a stain on the rug, Theo's fascination with ceiling fans. It wasn't epic. It was honest. Outside, the city continued. Headlines rising, tides arriving and departing, wolves circling, teeth bared, and some people deciding to be something else. If this story held your breath a little longer than you expected, it's because so many of us know the paper cut hurts, the compromises, the silences, the way power can make good people do small, terrible math. Lena's path isn't about perfection. It's about presence. Adrian's redemption isn't a grand gesture. It's 1,000 small ones, practiced daily, with no audience. In real life, justice looks like agents with steady hands, sisters who don't leave, neighbors who show up with soup, and babies who untangle our priorities. If you felt seen, or if you know someone who needs a reminder that safety and truth are worth fighting for, please like this video to tell the algorithm that stories like this matter. Share it with a friend who might need some courage tonight. And if you'd like more slow burn, emotionally rich dramas grounded in real life, hit subscribe. We'll keep making room for endings that keep going. The nursery smelled of lavender and paint, a soft, hopeful scent that clung to the air like a promise. Isabella Rossi Jones, 6 months pregnant and swathed in the cashmere comfort of her life, pressed the phone to her ear. On the other end, her husband David's voice was a familiar melody of warm reassurances. "Just closing the deal, Izzy. I'll be home soon." She smiled, her hand resting on the curve of her belly where their daughter slept. "Drive safe, my love." "Always. I love you." The line should have gone dead. But it didn't. And in the digital silence that followed, a new sound bled through. A woman's laugh, sharp and intimate. And the perfect world Isabella had built began to fracture. The mansion on the hills overlooking Austin was less a home and more a statement. A sprawling structure of glass, steel, and cold white marble, it was David's masterpiece, a testament to his success as the founder of Ethelred Capital. For Isabella, an architect by training, it was a beautiful cage whose bars she had only just begun to see. She had designed 2 houses before meeting David, structures filled with warm woods and clever nooks, meant for living and laughing. This house, however, was meant for showcasing. Tonight, it felt particularly vast and silent. The city lights below twinkled like a fallen constellation, but offered no warmth. Isabella walked through the cavernous living room, her bare feet cold against the polished marble. A floor-to-ceiling portrait of her and David, taken at a charity gala last winter, hung on one wall. In it, they were the perfect couple. He, tall and commanding in a Tom Ford tuxedo. She, radiant and adoring, her hand resting on his arm. It was a beautiful lie, captured in high resolution. She found herself in the nursery again. It was the only room in the house that felt truly hers. She had overseen every detail, from the soft grey walls to the hand-painted mural of a moonlit forest. Tiny dresses hung in the closet, and a collection of classic children's books lined a low shelf. Here, amidst the quiet anticipation of new life, the oppressive grandeur of the house receded. Here, she could almost believe in the portrait in the living room. Her phone buzzed on the rocking chair. It was him. "Hey, you," she answered, her voice softening instantly. "Hey, my beautiful wife." David's voice poured through the speaker, smooth and reassuring. "Sorry I'm so late. This deal is a monster." "It's okay," she said, settling into the rocker. "Just wanted to hear your voice before I fell asleep. The baby's been kicking up a storm. I think she misses her dad." It was a familiar routine, this late-night call, a small ritual to bridge the distance his work so often created. He was always closing a deal, always in a late meeting, always flying to some far-flung city to expand his empire. Isabella had accepted it as the price of admission for this life, for the security and comfort he provided. He worked hard for them. That's what he always said. "Tell her I miss her too," he chuckled, a low, intimate sound. "I'll make it up to you both this weekend, I promise. Spa day for you, and I'll spend all afternoon talking financial projections to your belly." Isabella laughed, a genuine, happy sound. "She'll love that. Please just get home safe, David." "Always. I'm wrapping up now. Should be home in an hour." "I love you, Izzy." "I love you too," she whispered, her heart swelling with an affection that felt as real and solid as the child growing inside her. She heard a faint click, the sound he made when pressing the end call button on his phone's screen. She was about to set her own phone down when she realized the call timer was still running. A pocket dial, she figured. It happened sometimes. She smiled to herself, imagining him rushing out of his boardroom, phone carelessly shoved into his coat. She raised the phone to her ear to press the red button, to sever the accidental connection. But before her thumb could tap the screen, a sound came through. Not the rustle of fabric or the muffled sounds of a car, but a voice, a woman's voice. "Is she off the phone?" The voice was light, laced with an amusement that was both playful and cruel. It was a voice Isabella recognized, though she couldn't immediately place it. It was drowned out by a wave of cold confusion that washed over her. Then, David's voice. No longer the warm, loving tone he used for her, but something different. Relaxed, unguarded, and laced with the same chilling amusement. Yeah, she's off. Probably gone back to fluffing pillows in the nursery. A quiet giggle. Poor thing. She's so wrapped up in that baby. Isabella's breath hitched. Her hand, which had been resting on her stomach, froze. The baby gave a gentle flutter, oblivious to the poison seeping through the phone. This wasn't a pocket dial. He hadn't hung up. He was still in a room, and he was not alone. She stood motionless in the center of the silent nursery, the phone glued to her ear. The lavender scent suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. Every instinct screamed at her to hang up, to throw the phone against the wall, to scream. But she couldn't move. She was paralyzed by a morbid need to hear, to understand the shape of the monster that had just stepped out of the shadows. God, you were incredible tonight, David. The woman's voice sighed. Closer now. There was a soft rustle, the sound of silk against skin. You closed the deal and then you closed me. You're a king. A low chuckle from David. We aim to please. Isabella's stomach churned. The phrase was so casual, so transactional. The world began to tilt on its axis, the hand-painted trees on the nursery wall seeming to warp and twist. Then came the words that shattered everything. The woman's voice, dropping to a sultry whisper, a parody of intimacy. You're my king, anyway. My brilliant, powerful husband. Husband! The word wasn't a term of endearment. It was a weapon, a claim, a stake driven directly into the heart of Isabella's life. The air rushed out of her lungs in a silent gasp. She sank into the rocking chair, her legs no longer able to support her. But the horror wasn't over. Don't call me that when we're here, David chided gently. But there was no force behind it. Only a shared, secret thrill. Why not? It's what you should be, she purred. Imagine what we could do, you and I, without her. Without the baggage. Baggage, was that what she was? Was that what their child was? Isabella felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to bite down on her lip to keep from being sick. This wasn't just a physical affair. This was a parallel life, a shared contempt for her. She's so easy to fool, though, the woman continued, her voice dripping with disdain. Still believes you're a faithful saint, home alone on your business trips working just for her. She's comfortable, David said, and the word was the cruelest cut of all. It was a dismissal, an explanation for why he tolerated her existence. She's good for my image, the loving wife, the stable family man. It plays well with the board. Isabella felt a tear, hot and sharp, finally escape and trace a cold path down her cheek. She wasn't a wife. She was a prop, a piece of his portfolio. Her pregnancy wasn't a shared joy. It was a strategic asset. There were more sounds then. A kiss, a soft moan, whispered words too intimate for her to bear. She was an unwilling voyeur to the demolition of her own life. The man whose child was moving inside her, the man who had whispered, "I love you," less than 5 minutes ago, was in bed with another woman, dissecting her worth as if she were a quarterly report. Her thumb, shaking uncontrollably, finally found the red icon on the screen. The connection severed. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than the quiet of the empty mansion. It was the silence of a future that had just been erased. She sat there, in the soft glow of the nursery nightlight, a ghost in her own home, clutching a belly that felt less like a promise and more like a shackle. The rocking chair creaked gently, the only sound in a world that had just ended. The first instinct was to scream, to hurl the phone against the mural of the peaceful forest and watch it shatter into 1,000 pieces. The second was to call him back, to unleash a torrent of rage and pain, to force him to hear the sound of a heart breaking in real time. Isabella did neither. She remained in the rocking chair, her body rigid with a coldness that had nothing to do with the night air. The shock was so profound, so seismic, that it bypassed hysteria and settled deep in her bones as a strange and terrifying clarity. A storm of grief was raging inside her, but on the surface there was only ice. She stood up, her movements stiff and deliberate, and walked out of the nursery, closing the door softly behind her, as if the baby were already sleeping there. She went to David's home office, a sterile, intimidating space she rarely entered. It smelled of leather and his expensive, spicy cologne. His world. She didn't turn on the main lights, using only the glow from the massive monitor on his desk. She found a legal pad and a pen with his firm's logo embossed in gold. She sat in his oversized leather chair, which dwarfed her, and in the encroaching darkness she began to write. Is she off the phone? Yeah, she's off. Probably gone back to fluffing pillows in the nursery. Her handwriting was steady, clinical. She forced herself to recall every word, every laugh, every pregnant pause. She documented the casual cruelty, the dismissive tone, the way they spoke of her as an obstacle, an inconvenience. She wrote down the word husband. She underlined it twice. I need to remember, she whispered to the empty room, her voice hoarse. I need to write this down so I don't convince myself I imagined it, so he can't tell me I'm crazy. The act of writing was an anchor. It transformed the chaotic, searing pain into data, evidence. It was a small act of control in a moment when all control had been ripped away from her. The architect in her, the part of her that understood structure and planning, was taking over from the shattered wife. When she was done, she stared at the page. It was a transcript of her own execution. A wave of nausea returned, and this time it was physical. She rushed to the adjoining private bathroom, a space of black marble and chrome, and retched violently. There was nothing in her stomach but acid and grief. Kneeling on the cold floor, she hugged her belly, her body trembling with violent sobs that made no sound. I'm so sorry, she choked out, the words directed at the innocent life within her. I'm so sorry I brought you into this, but I will protect you. I promise. I will protect you from this. That promise solidified something within her. The ice in her veins began to harden into steel. This wasn't just about her pain anymore. It was about the future of her child. She couldn't be a victim. She had to be a survivor, a warrior. She washed her face, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, but behind the devastation, a new expression was forming. It was resolve. She went back to her own bedroom, a space of soft creams and muted blues that now felt like a stranger's guest room. She crawled into the cold, empty expanse of the king-sized bed. She would not call him. She would not confront him. Not yet. A hysterical, screaming wife was easy to dismiss, to gaslight, to manage. A silent, watching wife, however. A silent wife was a threat. He had underestimated her. They both had. They thought she was the comfortable, naive woman who fluffed pillows in the nursery. They had no idea she was capable of strategy. He had forgotten to hang up the phone, and in doing so, he had hung himself. He just didn't know it yet. She would wait. She would watch. She would gather every piece of his betrayal until she had an arsenal so vast and undeniable that he would have no ground to stand on. Silence would be her weapon. Observation would be her strategy. He was about to learn that the woman he had dismissed as a piece of his portfolio was about to become the force that would liquidate his entire world. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. The storm was no longer inside her. It was gathering on the horizon, and she was directing its path. An hour later, the soft purr of David's Aston Martin gliding into the garage echoed through the house's intercom system. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of newfound steel. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed the covers of the bed, and closed her eyes, feigning sleep. The performance of her life was about to begin. The bedroom door opened with a soft click. She heard the clink of his cufflinks on the valet stand, the rustle of his suit jacket, the soft thud of his expensive shoes on the hardwood floor. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he owned the world and everything in it. He padded over to her side of the bed. She could feel his presence, his shadow falling over her. She kept her breathing even, deep, the rhythm of a woman lost in peaceful dreams. He leaned down, and his lips, the same lips that had kissed another woman an hour ago, pressed gently against her forehead. The touch felt like a brand, a searing mark of his deceit. It took every ounce of her willpower not to flinch. "Sleep well, my love," he whispered, his voice a perfect imitation of devotion. The next morning, the charade continued. He was a master of the form. He brought her coffee in bed, just the way she liked it, and a small velvet box. "A little something for the most beautiful mother-to-be in the world," he said, his smile as bright and empty as the house. Inside was a diamond bracelet, a cascade of cold, brilliant stones, a guilt gift, a down payment on her continued ignorance. Her stomach turned, but she forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "David, it's beautiful," she said, her voice a flawless copy of her former self. "You didn't have to. Nothing's too good for my girls," he said, kissing her belly before fastening the bracelet around her wrist. It felt heavy, like a manacle. She wore it for the rest of the day. The true test came that weekend at the annual Austin Museum of Art Foundation Gala. It was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, a place to see and be seen, a room full of power, money, and carefully constructed images. It was David's natural habitat. Isabella chose her dress with the precision of a general choosing armor. It was a deep emerald green silk gown that draped elegantly over her pregnancy, sophisticated and regal. She was not a wilting flower. She was a queen on her own chessboard. As they entered the grand hall, a symphony of polite applause and camera flashes erupted. David was in his element, shaking hands, clapping backs, his arm possessively around Isabella's waist. She was the perfect accessory, the pregnant, glowing wife that solidified his image as a stable, respectable titan of industry. She smiled until her cheeks ached, and then she saw her, standing by the main bar, holding a tablet and speaking into David's ear, was a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a sleek black bob. She was wearing a chic, minimalist dress that was both professional and subtly alluring. It was Amelia Vance, David's executive assistant. As Amelia laughed at something David said, her head tilting back slightly, the sound cut through the din of the party and hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. It was the same light, cruel laugh from the phone call. The world narrowed to the space between the three of them. David, oblivious. Amelia, confident and proprietary. And Isabella, watching, her heart turning to a block of ice. David led her over. "Izzy, you know Amelia, of course. The woman who keeps my life from falling into chaos. Of course, Isabella said, her voice smooth as glass. She extended her hand, her eyes locking with Amelia's. It's lovely to see you again, Amelia. David is so lucky to have someone so dedicated. She put the slightest emphasis on the last word, a microscopic shift in tone that only she could feel. Amelia's smile didn't falter, but for a fraction of a second, Isabella saw a flicker in her eyes, a quick, assessing glance. It was the look of a rival, sizing up the competition. Amelia didn't see a victim. She saw an obstacle. For the rest of the evening, Isabella watched them. It was a masterclass in covert intimacy. A shared glance across the room, a brief touch of his hand on the small of her back as she passed him a document. The way he leaned in, his head close to hers, under the guise of discussing business. They moved around each other with the unconscious familiarity of long-term lovers, hiding in plain sight. No one else saw it. They only saw the powerful CEO and his efficient assistant. But Isabella saw everything, every stolen moment, every secret smile. It was no longer just a suspicion. It was a performance. And she was the only one in the audience who knew the script was a lie. She sipped her sparkling water, the diamond bracelet on her wrist feeling colder and heavier with every passing minute. This was his world, built on lies and facades, and she would let him play his part, right up until the moment she brought the entire stage crashing down. The gala was the confirmation she needed, the final, visceral proof that stripped away any lingering sliver of doubt. Now, fueled by a cold, righteous anger, Isabella transformed. The grieving wife was buried. The forensic architect took her place. Her new project was the complete deconstruction of her husband's life. His home office, once a foreign territory, became her excavation site. She waited until he left for a supposed 2-day business trip to Dallas, a trip she now knew was a lie. The moment his car was gone, she walked into the room, not with the trepidation of a trespasser, but with the authority of an auditor. She started with his diaries, not personal journals, but meticulous moleskin planners where he logged his meetings and travel. She cross-referenced them with her own calendar, her old emails, her memories. A pattern emerged with sickening clarity. Conference call were Hong Kong investors, 10 p.m. A night he came home, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers. Emergency board dinner. A weekend he'd been unreachable for 6 hours because his phone had died. Tech Summit, Miami, March 12th to 14. The dates pulsed on the page. She remembered that weekend vividly. He had called her every night, his voice filled with feigned exhaustion, telling her how much he missed her. With a growing sense of dread, she moved to his computer. He was arrogant enough to use a simple password. Her birthday. The irony was a bitter pill. She navigated to Amelia Vance's social media profiles. Her Instagram was public, a carefully curated feed of a glamorous young professional on the rise. Isabella scrolled back, her fingers flying across the trackpad, and there it was. March 13th, a photo of Amelia, smiling on a balcony, a turquoise ocean stretching out behind her. She was holding a cocktail, wearing oversized sunglasses. The caption was innocuous. Sometimes you just need a little sunshine and salt air. Yet work perks, Jos Miami. The background, however, was unmistakable. The distinct Art Deco lines of the hotel balcony, the specific shade of the ocean. It was the St. Regis Ball Harbour. Isabella's breath caught in her chest. She remembered David mentioning the summit was being held at a generic convention center downtown. A lie. So blatant. So arrogant. The final piece of the puzzle lay deeper. She knew David kept a separate credit card for discretionary expenses, a black Amex with no limit, and, he thought, no oversight. It took her an hour of searching through his physical files, hidden in a locked drawer. She managed to pry open with a letter opener, but she found them. The paper statements. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning line items for hotels, restaurants, flights, and then she saw it. A charge from March for $40,682.15. The vendor, the St. Regis Bowel Harbour. The name on the folio, Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Her blood ran cold. The sheer, calculated audacity of it stole her breath. He hadn't just taken his mistress on a trip. He had checked them in under her name, using his secret credit card to pay for it, all while calling his pregnant wife to tell her he missed her. He had erased Isabella and replaced her with Amelia, creating a fantasy of a life he truly wanted, even if just for a weekend. This was the smoking gun. This was not a mistake, a moment of weakness. This was a premeditated, long-running conspiracy against her, against their marriage, against their child. She took out her phone and methodically photographed every piece of evidence. The planner entries, the Instagram post, the credit card statement. She saved them to a secure cloud server, then created a separate folder on a thumb drive she hid in her jewelry box. Her work was almost done. She had the what, the who, the when, and the where. Now she needed professional guidance on how. The next morning, she made an appointment she never thought she'd need. She called the top divorce attorney in Austin, a woman known for her discretion and her ruthlessness. When she met Julian Croft, a sharp, empathetic woman in her 50s, Isabella didn't cry. She didn't rage. She calmly laid out the printed photographs on the polished mahogany desk. "My husband doesn't know I'm here," Isabella began, her voice even. "He doesn't know that I know. He thinks I'm at home, planning a baby shower." Julian looked at the evidence, then back at the composed, pregnant woman sitting before her. She saw past the designer handbag and the diamond bracelet. She saw the steel. "Mrs. Jones," the lawyer said, a note of respect in her voice. "What is it you want?" Isabella met her gaze without blinking. "I want to be free," she said. "But I want to leave a crater where my marriage used to be." Isabella chose her moment with the cold precision of a demolition expert. It was a Thursday night, a week after her meeting with Julian Croft. David was at another late-night strategy session, a phrase that had become a euphemism for his betrayal. She sat in the dark living room, the city lights below, casting long, dancing shadows on the marble floor. The house had never felt more like a mausoleum. Her plan, as outlined with Julian, was in motion. Assets were being discreetly traced. A new apartment had been secured under her maiden name. Her escape was planned. All that was left was to light the fuse. She didn't wait for him to come home, to perform another act in their domestic tragedy. Confronting him in person would give him the opportunity to use his charisma, his well-practiced manipulations. He could touch her, plead with her, gaslight her until she questioned her own sanity. She would not give him that power. This would be clean, clinical, and final. On her terms. She dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and untroubled. "Izzy, everything okay? Is it the baby?" The feigned concern was automatic, a well-oiled part of his deception. "The baby is fine, David," she said. Her voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. It was not the voice of the wife he knew. "But we aren't. Our marriage is over." A beat of silence on the other end. Not comprehension, but confusion. This was not in his script. "What are you talking about? Did something happen? Are you feeling all right?" Isabella almost laughed at the immediate implication that she was unwell, hormonal, irrational. It was so predictable. "I've never felt more clear in my entire life," she replied, her voice dropping a degree, becoming colder. "I heard you, David. The other night, after you said you loved me. The silence that followed was different. It was heavy, dense, charged with the dawning horror of discovery. She could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the frantic search through his memory. I don't know what you mean, he stammered, his verbal armor cracking. You forgot to hang up, she stated simply. There was no accusation in her tone, just a flat statement of fact. I heard everything, every word, every laugh. She let the reality of his mistake sink in, picturing the blood draining from his face. She pictured him in a sterile hotel room or a sleek downtown apartment. Amelia at his side, both of them frozen in the act of being caught. I heard Amelia call you husband, she continued, twisting the knife he had sharpened himself. I heard you both laughing about how easy I was to deceive, laughing about me being at home, fluffing pillows in the nursery. Izzy, no, listen to me, he started, his voice a jumble of panic and disbelief. You must have misunderstood. It was a joke, a stupid, unprofessional joke. We were drinking. She cut him off, her voice sharp and final. Stop. Do not insult my intelligence by trying to lie your way out of this. I heard you. I know about Miami. I know you checked into the St. Regis as Mr. and Mrs. Vance. I know everything. The line went completely dead with shock. She had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his carefully constructed world, and he hadn't even seen the flash. He finally found his voice, a pathetic, desperate whisper. Isabella, I'm sorry. Please let me come home. We can talk about this. We can fix this. This was the moment she had braced herself for. The pleading, the promises, the remorse that was born not of guilt, but of getting caught. There is nothing to fix, David, she said. And for the first time, she allowed a tremor of the immense pain he had caused to enter her voice. You didn't just break a promise. You broke the entire foundation of our life together. I don't need your excuses. I don't need your apologies. I just needed the truth. And for once, you gave it to me. She paused, took a deep breath, and delivered the final sentence. Thank you for forgetting to hang up. You've set me free. And with that, she ended the call. She didn't throw the phone. She placed it gently on the table, stood up, and walked toward the bedroom to retrieve her bags. The silence she left on the line was the sound of his world beginning to burn. The phone call was not an end. It was an activation. The moment she disconnected, Isabella moved with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. The grief and shock that had paralyzed her were now transmuted into fuel. There was no hysteria, no frantic rush. There was only the methodical execution of a well-laid plan. Her bags were already packed, hidden in the back of the spacious walk-in closet. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, the important documents she had gathered. She also had a small fireproof box containing the thumb drive of evidence, copies of her financial records, and the ultrasound photos of her daughter. Her past, her present, and her future, all contained in one neat package. She walked through the silent, opulent rooms one last time. The house, once a symbol of her husband's success, now felt like a cold, elaborate stage set for a play that had abruptly ended. The portrait of them in the living room seemed to mock her, a monument to a colossal lie. She didn't feel sadness looking at it, only a profound sense of detachment, as if she were looking at two strangers. In the master bedroom, she went to her nightstand and opened the velvet-lined drawer. She took out a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored stationery, her personal stationery, bearing her maiden name, Isabella Rossi. She hadn't used it since she'd gotten married. Using it now was a reclamation. Her letter was brief, its brevity a statement in itself. It contained no anger, no recriminations, no pleas for understanding. An emotional tirade would give him something to react to, something to dismiss as the ramblings of a scorned woman. This was a corporate dissolution. David, by the time you read this, I will be gone. There is nothing left to say that wasn't already said by you when you thought I wasn't listening. There is nothing to discuss and nothing to salvage. My lawyer will be in contact with yours, Isabella. She didn't sign it with love or even with her married name. She signed the name she was born with, the name she would give to her daughter. She placed the letter on the center of his perfectly made pillow. Next to it, she laid 2 items. First, her wedding ring, a flawless 5-carat diamond that had once felt like the center of her universe. Now it looked like a piece of glass. Second, she unclasped the diamond bracelet he had given her the morning after the phone call, the guilt gift, the blood money. She placed it beside the ring. Let him choke on his glittering lies. With that final act, she turned and walked away without a second glance. She took nothing he had given her, save for the child he had unwittingly helped her create, a child who would now be raised far from the poison of his deceit. She walked out the front door, the cool night air hitting her face like a benediction. She didn't look back at the glass and steel cage. It was his prison now, not hers. She got into her own car, a practical SUV she had insisted on buying over the sports car he had wanted for her, and started the engine. As she drove down the long, winding driveway, she saw the lights of Austin twinkling ahead. They were no longer a distant, cold constellation. They were a beacon, a promise of a new life, a life that would be smaller, perhaps, but it would be real. It would be hers. This was not an escape. It was a liberation. She was not a woman running away from a broken home. She was a woman driving toward a new one, with her head held high and the future stirring inside her. David Jones drove like a man possessed, the Aston Martin's engine screaming through the quiet, wealthy hills of Austin. His mind was a maelstrom of panic and disbelief. She knows. She knows everything. How? The phone call replayed in his head, her calm, icy voice slicing through his arrogance with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was the unnatural calm that terrified him the most. He burst through the front door of the mansion, shouting her name. "Isabella! Izzy!" The only answer was the echo of his own voice, hollow and pathetic in the cavernous space. The house was deathly still. A profound and unnerving silence had taken root, a silence that felt heavier than mere emptiness. It felt like an absence. He took the marble stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with a fear he hadn't felt since his company was on the brink of collapse years ago. He stormed into their bedroom. The first thing he saw was the letter, a single cream-colored sheet resting on his pillow like a death certificate. Beside it, the diamond ring and the bracelet glittered under the recessed lighting. Twin accusations. His hands trembled as he read the note. The cold, formal words offered no purchase for argument, no opening for apology. It was a closed door. A sealed verdict. My lawyer will be in contact with yours. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a declaration of war. In the days that followed, David's world began to systematically unravel. The first blow was the formal letter from Julian Croft, an attorney whose reputation for dismantling powerful men preceded her. The letter was accompanied by a preliminary petition for divorce, citing infidelity. It was a quiet, professional opening salvo, but David knew what it meant. The social fallout was immediate and brutal. News in their rarefied circle traveled not like a ripple, but like a shockwave. Phone calls to friends, powerful allies who had dined at his table and vacationed on his yacht, were met with cool, clipped responses. His invitations were politely declined. He was suddenly persona non grata, the man who had committed the unforgivable sin in their world, not the infidelity itself, but the sloppiness of getting caught and creating a public scandal with a pregnant wife. Amelia Vance was the next casualty. Panicked by David's frantic, accusatory calls and unprepared for the icy glares she received at the office, she saw her future as a powerful partner evaporate. She was not David's queen. She was his liability. Within a week, she submitted her resignation via email and disappeared, refusing to be the public face of his disgrace. Her ambition did not extend to being a scapegoat. The professional repercussions were even more devastating. David was in the middle of a critical merger, a deal built on trust and an image of stability. A key investor, a staunch family man, and a casual acquaintance of Isabella's father pulled out, citing a sudden crisis of confidence in the leadership. The rumor mill on Wall Street churned, and Ethelred Capital's stock, once a pillar of strength, began to show cracks. David was left utterly alone in his glass fortress, haunted by the silence. The rooms, once a symbol of his power, now mocked him with their emptiness. He tried calling Isabella's cell phone, but it went straight to a disconnected message. He called her mother, who listened to his entire rambling, desperate apology before saying, "You have made your bed, David. Now you must lie in it alone." And hanging up, he called her closest friend, who simply laughed and said, "She's better off," before blocking his number. He was isolated by his own actions, a king in a kingdom of one. He would sit in the nursery, a room he had rarely entered before, and stare at the empty crib. He was surrounded by immense wealth, but he was bankrupt in every way that truly mattered. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost his anchor, his public shield, his best asset, and in the suffocating silence of his perfect mansion, he was finally forced to confront the deafening echo of his own choices. 6 months later, the ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel buzzed with the energy of hundreds of women. It was the annual Women in Leadership Summit, a gathering of female entrepreneurs, executives, and innovators. Seated at a table near the back, Isabella Rossi listened intently to a panel discussion on resilient leadership. She looked different. The soft, waiting quality she once had was gone, replaced by a calm, centered strength. She was no longer a wife in the shadow of a powerful man. She was simply herself. With her was her daughter, Grace, sleeping soundly in a carrier beside her. Grace was 3 months old, a beautiful, serene baby, with Isabella's dark eyes and a full head of black hair. She was the center of Isabella's new world, the tangible proof that life could begin again from the rubble. During a breakout session on overcoming personal and professional adversity, the moderator encouraged attendees to share their stories. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, Isabella stood up. "A little over half a year ago, my entire world was demolished by a single accidental phone call," she began, her voice clear and steady. The room quieted. "I learned that the life I was living was a lie, and that the person I trusted most saw me as an asset, and I was pregnant." She didn't share the sordid details. She didn't need to. She spoke about the power of silence, of strategy over screaming. She talked about turning the act of listening into the act of liberation. I realized that being the victim of a betrayal doesn't mean you have to adopt a victim's mindset, she concluded. Sometimes, the quietest exit makes the loudest statement. A wave of supportive applause washed over her as she sat down, a few women reaching out to touch her arm in solidarity. She hadn't shared her story for pity, but to close a chapter, to reframe her narrative from one of pain to one of power. Later, during a coffee break, a familiar voice called her name. "Isabella?" She turned to see Julian Croft, her lawyer, holding a plate of pastries. He had been a speaker on a panel about ethical corporate governance. "Julian," she smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "I didn't know you were attending." "I should say the same to you," he said, his eyes twinkling. He gestured to the sleeping baby. "And this must be the famous Grace. She's beautiful." "Thank you." Their conversation was easy and respectful. He had been a fierce advocate for her during the divorce, which had settled quietly and overwhelmingly in her favor. David, facing a PR nightmare and a collapsing merger, had agreed to all of her terms without a fight. He had wanted the problem to go away. "I heard what you said in the breakout session," Julian said, his tone sincere. "It was incredibly powerful. You've rebuilt everything on your own terms." "I had good counsel," she replied with a small smile. Their conversation lingered, moving from law and business to architecture and the challenges of raising a strong daughter. It was the first time she had spoken to a man without the ghost of her marriage hovering between them. It was just a conversation. Two professionals, two people connecting. It was simple, and it was a revelation. Later that week, Isabella sat on a bench in a sun-drenched park, Grace cooing in a bassinet beside her. The air was warm, filled with the laughter of children. She took out a new journal, this one bound in soft blue leather. She opened it to the first page. For months, she hadn't been able to write. The old journal from that first night, too full of pain to even open. But now, it was time for a new story. She uncapped her pen and began to write the final entry for a chapter of her life that was now truly over. David forgot to hang up the phone that night, and for a long time, I thought that was the moment my life ended. But I was wrong. That was the moment it began. He thought my world was small enough to fit inside his pocket, but he was mistaken. It was just waiting to be built. And this time, I'm the architect. He left the line open, but I was the one who listened, who learned, and who hung up for good. Thank you for the wake-up call. She closed the journal, a sense of profound peace settling over her. She looked at her daughter, a new life, a new beginning, and smiled. The sun was warm on her face, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt free. Isabella's journey from a shattered wife in a gilded cage to the empowered architect of her own life is a testament to the incredible strength found in the quietest moments of resolve. Her story proves that true power isn't about shouting the loudest, but about listening, planning, and making the deliberate choice to walk away with your dignity intact. She turned a devastating betrayal into a catalyst for rebirth, reminding us all that our worth is not determined by those who deceive us, but by how we choose to rebuild in the aftermath. Her silence was not weakness. It was the crucible where her new life was forged. If Isabella's story of turning betrayal into triumph resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they hold the blueprints to their own future. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of survival and strength. What was the moment you knew she had won? Let us know in the comments below.